For nearly 2 decades, a brilliant mathematician waged a secret war against modern society from a remote cabin in Montana, sending bombs through the mail that terrorized America and baffled the FBI in the longest and most expensive manhunt in their history. If you want to understand one of the most complex criminal minds in American history, you need to hear this entire story. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because this case has layers you won't believe. It started with a package, May 25th, 1978, Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois. The package was found in the parking lot addressed to a professor at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Troy, New York. The return address, another professor at Northwestern. But there was a problem. The return address was fake. When a security officer opened the package, it exploded. He survived, but suffered minor injuries. The device was crude, constructed in a cigar box, powered by batteries, but it was functional, and it was deliberate. The FBI had no idea they were looking at the first attack in what would become an 18-year reign of terror. Over the next 16 years, mysterious packages would appear at universities and on airplanes. They would explode in offices, in parking lots, in homes. 3 people would die, 23 would be injured, some maimed for life. The bombs grew more sophisticated over time. The bomber was learning, evolving, perfecting his craft. He left almost no forensic evidence, no fingerprints, no DNA, no witnesses. The FBI assigned their best minds to the case. They created a special task force. They called it Unabomber, University and Airline Bomber, because the early targets were connected to universities and airlines. But despite having some of the best investigators in the world, despite spending millions of dollars, despite following thousands of leads, they had nothing. No suspect, no motive, no pattern they could predict. Unabomber, as the media dubbed him, was a ghost. But ghosts aren't real, and every criminal, no matter how careful, eventually makes a mistake. This is the story of how America's most elusive terrorist was finally caught, not through forensic science or police work, but through the power of words and the courage of one family member who recognized something terrible in someone they loved. This story gets even more disturbing. Make sure you are following along. Comment below if you've heard of this case before, and let's dive into who the Unabomber really was. Theodore Kaczynski was once a child prodigy who entered Harvard at 16. But something happened during those college years. Something that would twist his genius into an obsession that would cost 3 people their lives and injured 23 others. To understand the Unabomber, you have to understand Theodore John Kaczynski. Born in Chicago in 1942, Ted was gifted from an early age. His IQ was tested at 167, genius level. He skipped 2 grades. By age 16, he was accepted to Harvard University. This should have been the beginning of a brilliant academic career. Instead, it was the beginning of something much darker. At Harvard, Kaczynski participated in a psychological experience led by Professor Henry Murray. For 3 years, students were subjected to intensive interrogations designed to attack their beliefs and values. They were humiliated, their ideas torn apart, their worldviews systematically dismantled. Kaczynski's was codenamed Lawful. Years later, some would wonder if this experiment damaged something fundamental in the young mathematician's psyche. Whether they planted seeds of rage against the system, against authority, against society itself. After Harvard, Kaczynski continued to excel. He earned his PhD in mathematics from the University of Michigan. His dissertation was so complex that only a handful of people in the world could understand it. One professor called it a work of genius. At 25, he became the youngest assistant professor ever hired by the University of California, Berkeley. But something was wrong. Kaczynski was isolated, socially awkward. He couldn't connect with students or colleagues. In 1969, after just 2 years, he resigned without explanation. His colleagues were stunned. He was on track for tenure, for a lifetime of academic success. Instead, he disappeared. Kaczynski moved to a remote area outside Lincoln, Montana. He bought a small parcel of land for $2,100 and built a cabin, 10 feet by 12 feet. No electricity, no running water. He wanted to live off the land, away from the industrialized society he had come to despise. But living as a hermit wasn't enough. As he watched the wilderness around him slowly encroached upon by development, his ideology hardened into something dangerous. Technology, he believed, was destroying humanity. Industrialization was a cancer. Modern society was enslaving people even as it promised them freedom. In his isolated cabin, surrounded by books and his own increasingly radical thoughts, Theodore Kaczynski made a decision. If society wouldn't listen to reason, he would make them listen through fear. The transformation from genius to terrorist is chilling. If you're finding this fascinating, hit the like button and share this with someone who loves true crime stories. Now, let's talk about the bombing campaign that would terrorize America. The first package arrived at Northwestern University in 1978, crude but deadly. And it was just the beginning of a pattern that would haunt universities and airlines for years, earning the unknown terrorist a chilling FBI codename Unabomber. Between 1978 and 1995, the Unabomber sent 16 bombs through the mail and left several others to be found. His target seems random at first: university professors, airline executives, computer store owners, a timber industry lobbyist. But there was a pattern. Even if investigators couldn't see it yet, every victim represented something Kaczynski hated: technology, industrialization, the modern world. The bombs themselves told a story of evolution. The early devices were crude: pipe bombs, materials from hardware stores, simple triggers. But with each attack, they became more sophisticated. Kaczynski was teaching himself, learning from his mistakes, perfecting his crafts. He was meticulous about evidence. He filed off serial numbers. He made his own screws and fasteners. He used untraceable materials. Every component was carefully selected to reveal nothing about the maker. By the mid-1980s, his bombs were works of deadly engineering. On December 11, 1985, Eve Scruton, owner of a computer rental store in Sacramento, picked up what looked like a piece of wood with nails in it left in his parking lot. It exploded, killing him instantly. It was the first death. The Unabomber had escalated from injury to murder. After Scruton's death, the bombing stopped for 6 years. Investigators hoped the bomber had died or been imprisoned for another crime, but he was simply waiting, refining his ideology, preparing for the next phase. When he returned in 1993, his attacks were more lethal. Thomas Moser, an advertising executive in New Jersey, was killed in his home in December 1994 when a package bomb exploded as he opened it in his kitchen. His wife and children were nearby. 4 months later, in April 1995, Gilbert Murray, president of the California Forestry Association, was killed by a mail bomb at his office. 3 dead, 23 injured, millions of dollars in damage, and the FBI was no closer to identifying the bomber than they had been 17 years earlier. The Unabomber seemed unstoppable, but he had an ego, and that ego would be his downfall. The bombing campaign is absolutely terrifying. but the way he was eventually caught is even more incredible. Before we get there, let me know in the comments, do you think the FBI should have been able to catch him sooner? And don't forget to subscribe. The next chapter reveals everything. In 1995, the bomber made an unprecedented offer, published his 35,000-word manifesto in a major newspapers, and the killing would stop. A decision that would ultimately lead to his capture through the most unlikely of sources. After 17 years of silence, the Unabomber decided to speak. In June 1995, the bomber sent letters to the New York Times and the Washington Post. In them, he made an extraordinary offer. He would stop the bombings if they published his manifesto, a 35,000-word essay titled Industrial Society and Its Future. If they refused, he threatened, the killing would continue. The FBI and the newspaper faced an impossible decision. Do you give a terrorist a platform? Do you let a murderer dictate terms? Or do you publish and potentially save lives? Attorney General Janet Reno and FBI Director Louis Freeh made the call, publish it. On September 19, 1995, the Washington Post printed the entire manifesto as an 8-page supplement. The New York Times split the cost and distribution. The manifesto was a dense academic critique of modern technology and industrial society. It argued that technological progress was destroying human freedom and dignity, that people were becoming slaves to the machines they created, that the only solution was to dismantle industrial civilization. It was extreme, it was radical, but it was also clearly written by someone highly educated, someone with a deep understanding of history, philosophy, and social systems. Millions of people read it. Some even agreed with parts of it. But one person recognized something more than just the ideas. Linda Patrick was married to David Kaczynski, Ted's younger brother. She had always found her brother-in-law odd, brilliant but deeply troubled. When she read the manifesto, something clicked. The phrases, the way arguments were constructed, the specific examples used, it reminded her of letters Ted had written to his family. She showed it to David. At first, he resisted. His brother? The Unabomber? Impossible. But as he compared the manifesto to letters Ted had sent over the years, the similarities were undeniable. The writing style, the unusual phrases, the specific arguments about technology and society. David Kaczynski faced a choice that would tear apart what remained of his family. He could stay silent and risk more deaths, or he could turn in his own brother. It took months of agonizing deliberation. David and Linda consulted with a private investigator. They struggled with the moral weight of the decision. Finally, in early 1996, David contacted the FBI. He gave them everything: letters from Ted, family history, the location of his cabin in Montana. The FBI was skeptical at first. They had received thousands of tips over the years, but as they analyzed the writing samples, excitement built. This was real. They had him. Imagine having to turn in your own brother. David Kaczynski showed incredible courage. If you're gripped by this story, smash the subscribe button because the capture is next, and you won't want to miss it. When FBI agents finally surrounded a small cabin in Lincoln, Montana, they found a hermit living without electricity or running water. But inside that primitive dwelling was a bomb factory, and the evidence that would solve one of America's greatest mysteries. April 3, 1996, a team of FBI agents and federal marshals surrounded a tiny cabin in the Montana wilderness, about 4 miles outside the town of Lincoln. They had been watching it for days, confirming that the man who lived there matched the profile. When they finally approached, they found Theodore Kaczynski chopping wood outside his cabin, wearing dirty, tattered clothes, his hair long and unkempt. At first, he gave a false name, But within minutes, he admitted who he was. I'm Ted Kaczynski. He was 53 years old and looked like a wild man who had been living in the woods for decades because he had. When agents entered the 10 by 12-foot cabin, they found exactly what they are looking for and more. Bomb components, detailed journals describing each attack, the original typewriter used to write the manifesto, photographs of victims, notes on future targets. It was a complete archive of 18 years of terrorism, meticulously documented by a man who believed he was fighting a righteous war. But there was something else too. Thousands of pages of writings, observations about nature, critiques of society, mathematical proofs. The cabin was a library of one brilliant, broken mind. Kaczynski was arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder and attempted murder. His trial became a spectacle. Defense attorneys wanted to argue instantly, but Kaczynski refused. He didn't believe he was insane. He believed he was right, that history would vindicate him. To avoid the death penalty and to maintain control over his own narrative, Kaczynski eventually agreed to a plea deal. In 1998, he was sentenced to life in prison without a possibility of parole. He would spend the rest of his life in a supermax prison, isolated, alone with his thoughts, exactly the kind of technological control system he had rallied against. The irony was not lost on observers, but the story doesn't end with his incarceration. The Unabomber case changed America. It led to dramatic increases in male security. It influenced how law enforcement thinks about domestic terrorism. It raised uncomfortable questions about mental health, isolation, and radicalization. And the manifesto, despite being written by a terrorist, it continues to be read and discussed. Some environmentalists and anti-technology activists reference it, carefully distancing themselves from the violence while acknowledging some of the arguments about technology's impact on humanity. Theodore Kaczynski died in federal prison on June 10, 2023, at the age of 81, apparently by suicide. For David Kaczynski, the man who turned in his brother, life was forever changed. He has spoken about the decision, about the guilt, and the necessity. He donated the $1 million reward money to the victims' families. He maintains he made the right choice, the only choice. Unabomber story is a tragedy in the classical sense. A brilliant mind twisted by isolation, trauma, and ideology into something monstrous. 3 people dead, 23 injured. Countless lives changed by fear. It's a reminder that intelligence without empathy is dangerous, that isolation can breed extremism, that ideas, no matter how sophisticated, don't justify violence. And it's proof that in the end, even the most careful criminal can be caught, sometimes by the very thing they never expected. Someone who knew them well enough to recognize their voice in 35,000 words. This is one of the most complex criminal cases in American history. If you found this deep dive valuable, please subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and share this with anyone interested in true crime or criminal psychology. What do you think about the Unabomber's ideology versus his methods? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want more stories like this, check out the video I'm linking right now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.